Why, hello there, Genevieve.
Hello, how are you?
I am very, very well, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule. I know we've been trying to find the right slot to talk about the many topics that need to be talked about for this very special episode of Just Chatting. Normally, I only interview desisters, detransitioners, etc., but I am interviewing Genevieve because Genevieve is involved in is it Redux or Redo? I can never
Redux.
Redux,
Yeah,
Redux, because the
Redux.
XX is the chromosomes, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. See, I'm smart. I can work it out. Can I just want to ask a few questions about Redux before we get into it. Firstly, if you can, how long has that been going for?
We launched in January 2022, so this would be our second year. But prior to that, Anna Slats, who's the co-founder with me, we'd been talking about this for a few months prior about how we really needed a publication that was focused on
Mm.
specific issues related to safeguarding of women and children as it pertains to gender ideology. So we'd been discussing it and then launched in January 2022. And during that time, we have published well over 1,000 articles
Thousand.
now. I forget what the total number is. I know that
Thousand.
I've personally written, like, I think about 400. It's hard to keep up because we're just so busy, but it's also been translated into several languages around the world, which is just wonderful to see because you can see that information getting out to some countries like Spain, for instance, where it's getting ahead of the kinds of issues that are starting to spring up elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations. That is a very, very impressive effort. Is it? There's more than just you and Anna Sluts on there. There's
Oh,
there's a
sure.
few
Yeah.
of you
Yeah,
now,
so
right?
initially our team was quite small, but we've managed to grow thanks to the donations of readers. I should say that this is really important. We're so independent. We don't get money from other sources, so we're not beholden to other people's political agendas. But because of that, we really rely on donations from readers. And because of that, we've been able to have some more writers come on board, like Shay Willahan, and are then able to pay them for their contributions, which we consider to be very important to do because it's hard work. It's sometimes demoralizing work.
Mm.
And if we're able to pay our writers, then that just helps to boost the morale and keep people motivated.
I get criticism for following and retweeting yourself and Redux for the simple reason that Anna Slats isn't a fan of a lot of men. I'm actually blocked by it. And I'm like, I had no idea who Anna Slats was until people started talking about it. Because I knew you were involved heavily in Redux, but um, there's this expectation that I'm supposed to be outraged that a woman who is heavily invested in researching the perversions of men is why would she be fucking happy with men, right? So it's like I just kind of want to put that one out there because anyone can block anyone if they like. That is their prerogative, and no one should be forced teamed to work with someone else. Like that
Mhm.
is a huge issue, and I really, really wanted to address that because I feel like there are people who are very good at picking these little holes, and there are always going to be disagreements. There are always going to be personality clashes in a movement as large as this. Not everyone has to get along. Um,
Mm.
I was just wondering what if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I think there's a bit of a double standard in the sense that women's words are perceived as a form of violence in a way that is typically not applied to men.
Hmm.
Like for myself, because I would really prefer not to speak for someone else, for Anna, but for myself, I've gotten all kinds of insults and threats leveled at me. And it's like if you just say something that men don't like, they perceive it as a threat of violence somehow. And I know that some women can be a bit abrasive, and I'm not talking about Anna, I just mean generally. But there is this double standard where it's like the violence that men do, not by everyone, but by society in general, tends to be taken as a given, whereas women's words are treated as if they're a threat of violence.
Yeah, and it took me because I will say when I first came into this, I was like fresh out of the cult and had a lot of what I call brainworms that were eating at me logic, and one of them was understanding the responses from women who tend to be very angry and for very good reasons, and very upset, and they are charging at you with all these statements about men. And I understand why some men think, oh, that's all violence and words, but really when you sit and boil it down, if I'm out on the street and there's a guy screaming into the air, I'm worried that that guy is going to hurt someone or me. If a woman's doing it, it's normally to draw attention rather than to say that violence is coming. And sometimes that clear, that screaming, that being quote unquote aggressive, whatever it is a way of establishing boundaries and saying, no, fuck you, don't come here, don't come closer, go away. And that is absolutely fine. That is not violence. And I think the people who have a big problem with that are the ones who are insistent on breaching boundaries. That is my learning, hard learning, because you have to understand, for people like myself, we come in this with a lot of fucked up ideas. You've got the internet, which has really fucked us all up too, and you're really starting from scratch, and everyone else is like on like level 100 in terms of their understanding. So it can be a bit of an uphill struggle, but I do understand why women react that way, and I do think it is unfair to classify that as violence. I think it's their right to tell people. I think it's anyone's right to tell people to fuck off.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Right, now that we've done a wee little introduction, let us get on to the meat of the topic. So we are going to discuss various amounts of factors that are contributing to this whole mess. Would you like to take it away with the first item on the list? Keep me right, Genevieve.
So we had talked about desistance activism and what is the end game? What is the goal to be achieved with desistance activism? And are there any Trojan horses to watch out for?
This is right. So I need to be careful how I navigate this. So I have been meticulously observing for the last 2 years on the whole playing field and how things have transpired. And I look at certain trans activists who play that it's a very sneaky game of, oh, you can use whatever pronouns you like, or just use me name, but you've got a very female coded name, so of course I'm going to use she, her, right? And these people have been implanting themselves in organisations from early as 18, 19, and I'm not going to name names, but I think you could probably guess who I'm talking about here, subtweeting as we speak. But what I worry with desistance activism and detrans activism is we are creating this new Trojan horse, because it looks like in 2018, 2019, when a trans activist comes like and says, yeah, I'm a man, but they're still living in that way, they're still doing the same behaviours, they still have the same beliefs, but they're saying, quote unquote, the right things, and people trust them. My worry is that with desisters and detransitioners is that this opens up a perfect opportunity for a new type of Trojan horse in the likes that we've never really seen, because this movement is a movement of very sophisticated narcissists, sociopaths and psychopaths who knowingly or unknowingly will put themselves into these spaces, which makes me very hyper paranoid when I get invited to these places, because my logic is we are like vampires, right? We will not come in unless you invite us in, and once we're in, that's it. Do you know what I mean? But somebody has to let us in. We can't just barge in. And I know it may feel like men have just barged into women's spaces, but a lot of us were invited. And I think when it comes to desistance and detransition, it's not that we should not be trusted, but you're dealing with like an ex-cult member here. They're vulnerable. They're not able, they may not have the best critical analysis skills. They may not be fully recovered, and they may be very susceptible to what I was very susceptible to at the beginning, which was making all these caveats like, I'm not doing this, I don't want to hurt anyone, because you get accused of a lot of shit. And that is where the danger lies, in my opinion. And I can see it now that in a couple of years' time, a desister, a detransitioner, and I'm mainly talking about the male side here, is involved in a women's group and then something happens. And it's hard to say without details, but I do know stuff in the background that has kind of sparked this, and I can't really voice it, if that makes sense, because it's the people involved don't obviously want it voiced. But I was wondering, what were your thoughts on the Trojan horse and the potential new Trojan horse of desistance and detransition activism?
Well, I think the true trans angle is a Trojan horse, and I think the interesting thing about that is that it's been going on for a while. Like, this isn't a new phenomenon. You know, we didn't just somewhere out of nowhere pick up this idea. The true trans idea goes back quite a bit. I think it was actually Harry Benjamin, it may have been, who drew up the first chart showing like this spectrum that he'd drawn of transvestic fetishism towards true transsexualism, which would be the surgery. But I find it a bit hard to logically work out how surgery itself is the thing that makes someone truly trans, you know, because it's still an outward action. And what true trans does is to say that your identity is defined by this outward action, and the more extreme the action is, the more true you are to yourself, right? So like transvestic fetishism, that's an outward action, right? But for some reason, because it's not as extreme as like, say, surgery, it's still kind of seen in a sense as being a fetish. You know, these days less and less, but originally so. But I question that narrative a lot, because what I see it as is just a spectrum of fetishistic behavior. And I have seen examples of, you know, fetishistic surgery. I think that the element of sexualizing surgery is something that hasn't been discussed enough.
Fetishistic surgery? Are you talking about like nullification surgery and all that sort of thing?
Nullification, as well, even just breast implants. I mean, right? Like breast implants for men, that's clearly got a sexual element to it. But I think that people have a hard time wrapping their minds around how surgery could be sexual in that way. And so for me, I think the Trojan horse there is the true trans debate, because that's been the debate recently, hasn't it? I mean, talking about how if a man says, yes, I'm a man, I know I'm a man, and I'm aware that I'm a man, but then wants to be addressed as she, that doesn't square, you know?
Or they set them up and they'll be like, no, you can use any pronouns, just use my name. And I'm like, I don't know any men called Susan. I'm just saying. So I'm instantly going to go with like the pronouns. When I hear a name that is mainly for women, my brain automatically slots in the pronoun after. It's such a fucking trap. Yeah, I suppose...
for example...
Go ahead.
So, for example, maybe online predation of men trying to crack eggs.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. So, on my Twitter, you will see a banner picture of a meme of two men in space. It's off the It's All Utah meme where there's two guys in space and one's got a gun to the other one's head and he's like, wait, it's all Utah? Always has been. But mine's on Egg IRL, which is a subreddit dedicated to making memes on quote unquote having your egg cracked. So this is like marking any celebration or any sign that may indicate a trans identity, but it's almost always heavily reinforced with anime. And I think this is used as a grooming technique, because if you look at a lot of the memes, the anime characters in that are mainly
Yeah,
the
that
children. They're not
anime
adults.
connection.
The posts are directed to appeal to younger people, but I don't know the exact age of the posters. I would imagine it's mainly AGP's posting based on the content, but the content in which they're posting is almost childlike. It's very infantilizing, and I don't know if you've ever heard this about anime. Do you know how to age a character in anime? It's all based off head height. So an adult should be 6 head heights high. That is how you age a character in anime. But if you look at a lot of anime characters, now all you need to do is take the measurement of the head and match it against the body. You'll see a lot of them are about 3 or 4 head heights, which is about 12 to 13 sort of age range. And then you look at the characters' faces, they've got a lack of sort of features. And to me, I think it's like it grooms people into this sort of sexualizing themselves as a young female, right? It's pedophilia in a sense. And I know this is a really extreme take, but I do think that transition itself is less about wanting to be the other sex and more about not becoming an adult version of your sex to escape that responsibility. But in doing so, that crosses so many wires with sexuality. And I think this is why there is so much, and I don't want to sound like a hardcore right-wing Christian type, but because I'm not, but it leads to degeneracy. In the trans community, you've got a massive overlap with two main fetishes. One is furries, and the other is the adult babies. And it's all centered on regression and dissociation, but also because it's masked as innocent and it's masked as like, oh, they're just being cute. I'm sorry, no. If you look at the profile and they're all drawn porn and all that sort of thing, and this is a very, very hard topic for them to talk about because nobody wants to get labelled as a degenerate, but this is kind of all that I see in those spaces. Bear in mind, I spent 8 years as trans. I've been online a lot. I've been in Discords. I know what these people are like. Obviously, hashtag not all. Some aren't really addicted to the internet, but some have got really weird, fucked up ideas of what men and women are too. But going back to the original point of egg cracking, this is the process of just slowly conditioning yourself, but through these available memes to believe that you are actually trans. And you can see the egg cracking process can either be done by yourself, but it's almost always done by other people. So you go into a group and you say, I did XYZ, and they're like, XYZ is so trans. That is such a typical trans thing. I did XYZ. And it could be a really benign thing. Like, really benign. Like, not even sexed. And you've also got the ones who, because it gets darker, there's always a layer down. So when you get down the layers, you do get people who have straight up castration fetishes, who want to see as many people castrated as possible, or you get people who want to see as many people on hormones as possible, regardless of the trans identity or not. And you'll see them on Twitter, these accounts that will track how many eggs they've cracked, right? And they'll say like 50 egg crack, and it's like, oh, so you got 50 victims. That's what you're doing. And just to give you an example of what happened with me is, I went on this site which was mainly centered around, how should I say? it was hookups for men who were into cross dressers and stuff, right? Where I was like, I was thinking maybe I'm just a cross dresser because that's what I thought I was, and I wanted to just hook up with men, so I used that site. But that's where my egg essentially really got cracked because it was like, you're so pretty, you're so beautiful, you look amazing, and all this sort of thing. You don't, and what you find is like there's this sort of projection going on where they project onto you what they wish they were when they were our age, and it gets worse the younger you are. So in 2014 or 2013 as a 24, 25-year-old, and still an adult, I know, but I looked very young. I do look young for my age, even without the hormones. And a lot of them were just like, oh my God, you need to transition now. If I did it then, you're not going to regret it, and all this sort of thing. So it is very much like a group conditioned process. Have you came across anything in terms of the grooming side? I'm sure you would have in ReduXX.
Sure. Give me a moment to just think of a specific example. Well, I had been looking at social media of this German trans activist that I'm just not going to name for reasons, but he was also joking about cracking eggs on his Facebook page, and as well, he had this clear castration fetish, like posting images of circumcision, of this is so disturbing, but like images of genitalia that he claimed was intersex genitalia. So, I mean, in the context of him joking about cracking eggs and then seeing that accompanying content is just really disturbing. I want to come back to what you were saying about pedophilia, though, because I think in the mainstream conversation about this connection, there will be people who say that pedophiles or child sexual abusers just are latching on to the movement for their own gain because they will latch on to anything that gives them a pass. Mm-hmm. But I see it differently from that, and I see it differently because I've looked at specific cases for the past 2-3 years. And what I see is not so much predators latching onto the movement, but actually the movement itself as a form of predation, mm-hmm. and a connection between that age regression fantasy that you were talking about with the transitioning as a form of trying to reduce age or avoid aging. Mm-hmm. The age regression fantasy combined with the sexualization of children. So, like using children as a shield for their own fetishistic activities, right? So if you have children involved, they're innocent. They can't be sexual according to rules that we have established based on morals in society. So they get to cover up their own fetishistic behavior by using children in this manner. But there's just so many connections to infantilization. Like, just for example, Dylan Mulvaney calling himself a girl, but mm-hmm. a lot of these adult men who go on to take female hormones then will refer to themselves as a girl and start behaving in these childish like ways, or calling themselves a bimbo. And I think that kind of projection is actually telling you, in many cases, perhaps not all, but in many cases telling you what they're attracted to. They're attracted to childhood, they're attracted to girls, they're attracted to youth and innocence, and that aspect of it, seeing it over and over again in the stories that I've reported on, has absolutely changed the way I perceive the whole debate. Mm-hmm. And the way to be frank, the way I see the world,
Yeah, that's very gnarly. I really actually feel like sick in my stomach when you say that, because it's fucking true. The whole girl thing, thankfully I didn't get on board with any of that bullshit, like call myself a trans girl or all that. I was like, I'm a male who's transitioned, but I was quite based in transition, actually. Like, I think me talking to me in the past now, I'll probably get on with past me, even though it was a bit abrasive. But the whole trans girl thing or the trans boy thing does feel like a mouthfeel. And when you look at young transitioners, especially anyone from teen to 20s, in that age range, that the women look like boys and a lot of the men who transition just look like young men. It's all about making yourself into like a childlike, vulnerable person. And the whole narrative is all about being vulnerable. It's almost like they are adult children in a way. We need to protect them. We need to include them. We need to speak up for them. We need to do everything for them because they are so vulnerable. But actually, it's not that simple. I do believe that there are people who, and I talk to a lot of transitioners and detransitioners, and there's so much trauma in our lives, like so much. And when you take that lens to it and you can see it is an escape from that trauma, it may not justify it, but it can explain why some people, or a lot of us, are kind of trying to escape becoming that adult version, that one who has to take responsibility because we're not past our own trauma. And to be honest, when I was in transition, up until about year 5 or 6 of transition, I was very childish in my behaviour. I was very, very stroppy. I was hitting tantrums all the time and all that sort of shit. And it was like, because I was permitted to do it, and no one could do shit about it. No one couldn't do anything about it. I had a free pass to act like a twat. Mic drop.
Do you think that there's a connection there with the autism pattern? You know, is there something involved with arrested development or not wanting to take on responsibilities or become an adult associated with autism?
Yes, I do think that, well, autistic people generally can be like very slow to develop the emotional side of things, and like understanding like the social contracts and boundaries. That was very tough going for me. It took until my very early 30s to really, really get a grasp of what is and what isn't appropriate in conversations and when to speak. You know what I mean? It's like, it wasn't as if I was being like rude or anything like that. It was mainly, I was so fucking clueless. And I remember after surgery, about 32, about a year after, year and a half after, and I was just thinking, God, I actually feel like I've grown up, and because I went through this immense medical trauma, and I'm like, God, what the fuck have I just done? Like, I am so sorry. For the men, I think the rate of autism and ADHD is, as Hakeem thinks, it's 100%, and I think is about right. It is just about every single male because it is a very absolutist view to think that you are trans because of the way you are. You're not a male because of the way you acted, because you liked to be a ballerina when you were a child, for instance, and you're a man, right? That sort of thing. It's like this very absolutist. It's like a rule-based system. It's like, I can't be a man because XYZ, because I like XYZ or whatever. But that is also a huge part of the arrested development, the autism. But there are plenty of autistic people who don't transition as well, because I feel like there are a lot of like other factors in this that bring someone to it. But sorry, I'm just going off on one here, Genevieve. Well, I'm sure people want to hear more from you than just me rambling on.
Well, let's talk about some of those other factors that are involved, not just autism. So, I think that the selfie plays a role in this too. For example, using filters, face filters, and so on. And I think that unfortunately for young women, being inundated with these face filters and Instagrammable aesthetic and things like this obviously has an impact on how young women and girls would view themselves. But on the flip side of that, there's that, like, I actually don't prefer the word autogynephilia, if I'm being honest, because I don't quite gel with the implications of that. But that kind of internalized objectification that you see with men who then decide to transition, they always want to be like this young, Instagrammable woman or girl and look like almost like a cartoon character, right? Like you were saying with the anime, like they
Yeah.
want to look like this ageless fabrication. And I think that the filters are not doing any favors, especially I imagine that, there's these men who take pictures of themselves, they put the filter on, they do the gender swap filter and think, oh, wow, if I transitioned, I would look like this.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then also the update progress pictures that a lot of these guys share online as well are totally bogus. They're photoshopped to the max. They're not real. And so there's this false idea of what estrogen does to men. That they think it'll stop balding, that it will make their hair grow more full, or I'm talking specifically about the older men, but it's all fake. It's like it's all just in the digital realm that you're getting this idea that you would be this young, sexy thing if you would just transition.
That's a really powerful observation about the gender swap and people expecting that that's what they're gonna get. And you can always tell when you deal it. I know you don't like autogynephilia as a term, but I'm just using that as a shorthand here. But you see them on Twitter, and they've always got the same AI generated avatars and bullshit like that, right? And you can instantly tell what they look like in real life. Not to be mean, but it is a way of training yourself, and it's like a way of forced self-feminization in a way. And I've seen those progress pics of people who will take the same selfie from the same angle every day, and they'll have like an app that will try and detect the gender and stuff, and it'll post the result because they're doing it from a very specific angle, like normally quite high, not under light, and it's very controlled. None of them take like head-on selfies under light, and the second they do that, they realize just how deep the brow ridge is, how big the chin is, like these things that are like distinguish your sex, right? And it's like we're trying to, it's such a mind fuck because you've got this self-training going on where you believe you are your selfie, right? And then in real life, obviously that doesn't match. So let me tell you what happened to me. If somebody ever took a picture of me that I wasn't in control of, I would freak the fuck out because I would get to see what I really looked like. Whereas I didn't use filters. What I used was angles. People used to call us the selfie queen, right? Because I never used a single filter, but I was very good at getting the angle just right, the light just right to make us look like a certain way. And when I looked at a lot of my old photos, and it's really annoying when I'm trying to do like a news article and stuff, because I've got no good old transition photos, because they're all fake. They're all bullshit. Like every single one of them is pretty much bullshit. It's not a true representation of how I was, and that is a very difficult realization, because this is all a realization when you desist, and it's like, wow, I've just been bullshitting myself for the last 10 years, like really badly. This is such a mindfuck. So I do think there is, and like you said, there is a training going on with these apps, and it is definitely morphing people's self-perception, because when they go out the real world, it just doesn't meet that challenge, and it's like, why are people reacting this way? Everyone online says I look beautiful on this very well doctored selfie, but they never share the 100 pictures they took and deleted, do they? They only share that one perfect one where the angle's right or the filter's on.
Right. And then, you'll see older men using these kinds of examples to then encourage younger men, or just otherwise in the egg IRL group, look what it did for me. You should do it. You should feminize. I wanted to ask you too, and I know we didn't have this in our notes before, but I was curious if you had some thoughts on the femboy phenomenon. Like, I think there's a few popular streamers who do this whole femboy aesthetic with the like anime cat ears and the schoolgirl
Yeah.
skirts and things. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, what you think who is the audience for this? Who is picking up on this femboy trend, and what are your thoughts generally on it?
So, my thought on with the whole femboy thing is that was something that I fell into before transition, and it was a way to match up with other men for me, and because I think it's a shortcut to accepting your homosexuality first of all, and your attraction to males, but it's kind of doing it through this other lens of you've got a masculine body but a very feminine face, and it does get very uncomfortable because you look at some of the femboy stuff and you're like, they don't really look like a feminine man, they look like a boy, and that kind of is the key word here. It's boy, it's not man, fem man, it's femboy. And it's young women who get obsessed with being a femboy, and that's a dynamic that I'm really quite understood. And again, I think it's this way of trying to process their heterosexuality in a world that is saying that heterosexuality and vanilla stuff is boring and not relevant. But a lot of the women who are into the femboy stuff, the young women who transition, who call themselves femboys, are normally bisexual or straight women who are trying to make sense of themselves, and normally quite autistic too. But what was your take on the femboy stuff?
Well, I question who the audience is. I question, because I genuinely don't know, which is why I brought it up, like whether or not it's, gay men or straight men. Because I'm very confused about who this is supposed to appeal to. Now, I know that technically with some of these streamers, they're talking to young people, people of their own age, but I do question, what kind of other people might be interested in this. Like,
well, let me tell you this, Genevieve.
Yeah.
The money that comes in on donations ain't coming from 16 and 17-year-olds. It's coming from people with a lot of money, a lot of jobs, and there is the flip side to this. So you've got me trying to find a partner, but also trying to accept my sexuality in these spaces. And lo and behold, when I went in and I found all the trans stuff and all that from there, and all the because I was very repulsed by the term crossdresser. I was like, I'm not really a crossdresser. That doesn't, because I was looking at crossdressers in the pictures. I was like, ew, that doesn't look like me. And then you see all the femboy shit, and you're like, that is me. That's more me. Because no one wants to be associated with a 55-year-old with saggy skin and like a fucking cocktail dress. You know what I mean? And they all look the same. Ugh. Anyway, God, keep us on track here, Genevieve. I've had too much coffee this morning.
Well, again, it's sort of this unrealistic expectation and the feminization of. Can I jump off here on a different point? It's kind of related. It's the forced feminization issue, because I see a lot of these things online that are known as Sissy captions, and you and I had discussed how you had thought the Sissy thing was just a bullshit myth, but I just want to explain about these Sissy captions, which are images that are typically of actual women or girls, and they might even be borrowed from pornography scenes. But then they'll have text written along the side of it, so the caption part, and it'll be some kind of fantasy story about how I turned into a girl. But then there are ones that involve children as well, quite a lot of them. I know that quite a lot were distributed through Tumblr a few years back, but they're on Reddit. I mean, they're pretty much on all over social media. There's this kind of thing that happens when social media platforms die or become less popular. Like, for example, Pinterest has now been flooded with this kind of content of, little boys being made to dress up in girls' clothing, and then this fantasy about, oh, and then I started to give him hormones, and then I started to, so it's like a very sexualized fantasy about transitioning children, and I'd actually found an app that was full of stories like this. Like, I don't mean simple stories. I mean, like, there was hardcore written pornography involved in these. And I'd written about this in like 2021, so it was a bit ago. And the app would have an AI child's voice reading out the
Oh my
stories.
god.
And some of them were making movies on YouTube. So it would link to unlisted YouTube movies that were like mods of games, video games, so The Sims or something, but they would modify the games to have like so disgusting, like children, being feminized and things like that.
Jesus
And so I'd
Christ.
written about that, about 3 years ago now. After I had done it, I got the app taken down with the help of a lawyer for a girl whose photo was being used on the app. So
Well
like a
done for that.
14-year-old girl's real
That's
photo.
the real work, Genevieve. So well done, like really well done.
But they also used, photos of actual boys who are being made into like drag queen stars or makeup gurus on Instagram. So that element of the sexualization of forcing children to transition is something that has never left my mind. And it's in everything that I look at in this issue. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, one, just go back, like, I've came across like sissy stuff before, like even before transition, and I was like, that's not me. That's like extreme That to me was like extreme cross dressing. I would classify extreme, like, you know how they get those ridiculous dresses and like, you know what I mean, and it's all about turning them like into a it looks like they're trying to be a child almost. So it was very like off-putting, and when I went into detransition or even in transition and people would talk about sissy hypnosis, I genuinely thought they were taking the piss. I was like, I've never heard of that. And then all of a sudden I started hearing detransitioners talking about how they used to listen to these tapes or YouTubes at night that would whisper into the air about being a woman and how they were like all this sort of thing. So it definitely is real. It definitely does exist. As for what you were saying about the app and the stories, that is just fucking horrifying. That sounds like some pie shit. Like you know what I mean? It really, it's really dark. Like when and no one wants to dig too deep because this may not be the majority, but it's enough that it's quite prevalent and it toxicifies everything else. And it's why I really, really get very sketchy about anyone who tries to retcon their own childhood to signs that they had dysphoria, because that, to me, tells me a lot about their sexual targets. For instance, if you have a certain autogynephile, and I know you don't like the word, talking about how they had autogynephilia when they were 3 years old, that's a red flag, by the way. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Huge,
Yes.
huge red flag. Like, alarm, they've essentially told on themselves in a massive fucking way by doing that. But as for the sissy hypno and the forced feminization, I think that is a lot of what we do to ourselves with the selfies on IRL. It's just a different type of forced feminization, as it were. And to be honest, the brainworms are very, very, very deep. And I'm speaking candidly as I possibly can, without making it sound like I'm a horrific person, because I need to be honest about these things. There was how should I say, a need. I really didn't want to be a man, and I think that was because I was really, really like, I'm not ready to like take that responsibility, and I had so much trauma and all that sort of shit, and it was like I might not voice the words I don't want to grow up, but I really didn't want to grow up, if that makes sense. I didn't want to be an adult. I didn't want the responsibility. I didn't want to have to deal with everything, and that is me looking back retrospectively, if that makes sense. and then in the process of transition, and even if you're not looking or in those spaces that are all about sissification and forced feminization, you do it inherently by being there, by talking about the transition, by talking about the science, by sharing the selfies, by sharing the memes. And I think I know what you mean about the caption shit. I've seen them before, but they were like old drawn pictures with captions. Have you seen those before as well? It's not actual real photos, but they're like, I don't know how to explain it. They look like World War
have
Two
seen.
cartoons.
Yes, it's very of its time. It looks
Creepy.
like the 1940s or 50s, and then that is termed petticoat discipline. So a kind of BDSM that involves
Jeez.
petticoats and stockings, and like little Mary Jane shoes that are typical for young girls
Again,
of
sexual
that time
target.
period. Yeah,
And I mean,
yeah.
that
But what I
seems
see
very
more than that,
Sorry,
sorry.
that seems very specific for a certain age group, doesn't it? Because,
Oh, yes.
yeah,
Yeah. And I wonder too about the term cracking eggs, right? Because that's got to do with like being born again.
yes.
So there's something involved here about the second puberty that some of these people talk about. Like, I'm going through a second puberty once you start taking hormones. That it's like you're being born again and you're going through your childhood again, which I find disturbing.
Baptism by pharmaceuticals. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's what it is, right? It's like a medical, spiritual, sexual cult. It's got all those things mixed together.
Yeah. And it's a sacrifice too, because you sacrifice in strength, fertility, health. You're sacrificing a lot, and when you go for surgery, regardless of what the surgery is, that is also a sacrifice of flesh. You are giving your flesh to the commitment of this belief. And that, when I sit and think about how committed I was to believing like I'm gonna be trans forever, I'm gonna da 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 da, and then you're so sure that this is gonna be the thing that you agree to a surgery that like inverts your penis and all that sort of shit. It's kind of wild when you sit back and think about it. I just want to segue onto Germany for a second, because I know Germany, I feel like in terms of like the worst countries in the world for this, I think Germany's probably the worst in Europe, followed by Spain. Spain's super fucked up, mainly because of the trying to decriminalize sex with kids and stuff like that through the back door of trans activism. And on the other side of the Atlantic, you've got Canada leading the way as being the worst, followed by the US, which the US is obviously the largest of all. I just wondered what your thoughts were on Germany, because I have read a lot of stuff you've put out about them. It's very concerning. Can you talk about Germany a bit?
Sure, Germany is in big trouble. And as is typical, anyone who criticizes this is portrayed as a Nazi. Well, but in Germany, that carries quite a lot of weight, as you could imagine. But I want to talk specifically about an example of this. So a man named Rüdiger Lopman, I think it's said, who is a German sociologist, and he recently was on the board of directors for a quote-unquote queer organization that was promoting the medical transitioning of children as young as 7. And by their recommendations, the children would be able to medically initiate a quote-unquote gender change without parental consent. And the history of Lotman is that he has been a staunch pro-pedophile advocate in the past. So he had previously written a book that was a series of interviews with 60 men who self-identified as being pedophiles, and he portrayed them sympathetically within this text. I forget the exact year, but I think it was in the 70s. Seems about right. but he was seeking to find a way to categorize types of pedophiles that would be what's called in the activism today is called, virtuous pedophiles.
No such thing.
But he was
Sorry.
also an associate of Helmut Kentler, who Helmut Kentler, for those who don't know, had famously rehomed children with pedophiles through
Oh
a
my
project that was
God.
approved by the Berlin Senate, and it went on for quite a while. I think it was like 1979 to 85 or
Fucking
so, but it
hell.
was going on for a while. And so Helmut Kentler, people know of for that, but Lotman had a close relationship with him throughout his career. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. The Kentler project was started in 1969 and
Of
wasn't
course.
ended till the 80s. And so Lotman worked with this group called the Humane Sexuality Working Group, which pushed the idea that quote unquote pedosexual contacts could be consensual with children. And he was also involved in campaigning for the deletion of Section 176 from the German legal code, which would have eliminated the age of consent. So I
Jeez.
bring this up as an example of the heavy hand that Germany has played in this kind of activism, especially pedophilia activism, but that a lot of these German sexologists are involved in, gender identity promotion. And Lotman is like this perfect example of that, where he's in this political group calling for children to be able to transition from the age of 7.
How do you keep sane reading all this shit? It's like it feels like even just I know bits and bobs from conversations we've had offline, but nothing as much as you in terms of your research. How do you not go insane listening to all this vile shit?
Have I not gone insane?
You
I feel like
sounds
people look at me now and they're like, whoa, 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 slow down, slow down. I just found out about this men and women's sports thing, and you're over here talking about German sexologists. And I just can't, once I saw that connection, like I told you, it was initially the sissy stuff that made me see the connection with sexualizing children. But then the more you look into sexology, it's actually quite a rotten tree with all of
I'm
this like fruit. You knock one down and then a whole bunch of rotten apples fall down. Go ahead.
I'm so glad you mentioned sexology. So glad because I, John Euler has he's mentioned that predators tend to go into spaces or professions where they can predate without question. So the most obvious one is accessing children directly, but the other less obvious one is the justification. So you've got your guys who are trying to change law, but also the ones who are trying to quote unquote normalize deeply damaging paraphilias, because paraphilias, whatever for what you want to say, are highly, highly destructive on the individual. It's an escalation route. And a lot of sexologists that I've seen, pointed out by the likes of Karen Davis and others, who have basically said that likes of James Cantor and a few others are signed up to the virtuous pedophile site. And I just want to go back onto virtuous pedophiles and said, to mimic what John Euler says, there is no such thing. They don't get to that point without offending. They have offended. It may not have been in person with a child, but they have offended. To get to that point, they have certainly offended. And I kind of feel like the whole thing with the trans thing is a new type of it's a type of psychopathy, if that makes sense, because you have to be psychotic to play those mental gymnastics, to not only say that something that is immoral is moral, but that it's also beneficial to the person who's impacted the most, e.g. the child. Which is why the likes of Peter Tatchell need to go into a wood chipper and burn in hell for all his work in trying to lower the age of consent. We'll see you, Pedro. I fucking see you. and you will never, ever get any way in. You're done. You have been caught. You should. I'm not going to say anything else because I'll probably already get struck off for this one. But yeah, I do really feel like that is an intrinsic link that cannot be ignored between sexologists and virtuous paedophiles. And you look at Harry Benjamin, John Money, all these other old school sexologists. Like what John Money did to the Reimer twins, like a lot of people don't know. Like you had them masturbate in front of them, you had them look at each other naked, and all this sort of thing. It was really, really fucked up what he did to the Reimer twins. Both of them killed themselves.
As he took pictures. He took pictures as well.
Yeah, he took pictures. He was measuring the masturbation and orgasm and all sorts of really horrific shit. It was a really, really bad series of abuses. David Reimer, I think he was 39 when he died. His brother, I think, died at 36. It was just really, really disgusting. And the fact that this person is revered is just annoying. And Harry Benjamin and all the others, they're no good. They're no better either. There is no benefit to anyone but the man, because it is a male thing, in my opinion. It's overwhelmingly a male thing, like 99%. The only benefit is to the man, for their own sadistic pleasure. There is no benefit to anyone else. And I feel like when you are focusing on the paraphilia aspect, like transsexual fetishism, all that does, if you normalize all this, you can normalize any paraphilia like pedophilia. And this is a very difficult topic, but this is where we're heading. And I know people react very like, that's very hyperbolic and all that sort of thing, but I'm sorry, look at Germany. And I must ask, is it too late to restart World War II? We can still bomb it, I'm sure. I don't know.
Man.
I know it's pretty rough, isn't it? But I'm sorry, Germany. You guys, I'm not sure if you do need another.
The situation there is so bad. I just feel so terrible for women in Germany because they've got to deal with this legalized prostitution industry on top of this, and they have so much work cut out for them. That's another thing too, within the trans activism, they'll often advocate for the sex industry. So women who are in Germany trying to oppose the normalization of brothels and sex trafficking of women are rebranded as like being transphobic, because in every country in the world where we have a strong vein of trans activism, they're always united under the banner of protecting the sex industry, whether that's pornography and prostitution, both usually.
I have
So what's going on with that? Because it strikes me that let's think about the three main things that are advocated for under gender identity. One, that children can make decisions about their genitals, and that also their puberty should be perhaps be stopped. Okay. Then two, pornography should be normal, and then three, prostitution should be allowed. That's when you put them all together like that, I find it pretty disturbing.
It is, and the more you spell it out, the more horrified I feel. So thank you, Genevieve, for scaring me today. But you are absolutely dead right that this, it's like the worst type of sex movement. It's not a fucking lovers like power and 60s flower power bullshit. It's none of that, is it? It's all about deviancy. And I'm sorry to say that word. I sound like a fucking crack, but that's what it is. It's like the most deviant, debauchery things that we can get out there as quickly as possible. And it is literally destroying the very fabric of society. It's destroying boundaries, consent between parents and children, and it's absolutely it's saddening. But there was a point I was going to hit on before.
You were going to talk about your experience with someone in Germany, a German TV program, maybe?
I've been in no, I've been on German TV. I've been on Welt TV. I've also worked with Angela Ritcher, who is the lady who she's a playwright. She's worked with Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, and she said that this blew my mind when because I had an interview with her. She was more scared releasing the article of the interview with me than she was releasing anything with Edward Snowden or Julian Assange, and she'd been interviewed by like the CIA and the Russian Secret Service. What are they called again? The K something. You know what I mean? KBG. Yeah. So, but it was the interview with me that made her fear for not just her. It wasn't like her life was at threat because Germany's so insane. It's like they will not just come after her, they'll come after her associates, her family. They will ruin businesses. They will bankrupt people. Like, the lobby is so powerful in Germany, and I now understand why she was afraid to air that one, but I'm glad she did. Fantastic lady. But Germany does feel like the front, the battleground, where a lot of this, it's either going to go way, way worse there and everyone else is going to roll back, or everyone's going to roll back and they're going to have to. I don't know how this is going to intersect. But I do feel like we are undergoing like a mass disclosure over the last year with the helps of people like ReduXX and people who are speaking out about various different facets of all the issues that are going on, that we are undergoing like a full disclosure of what's happening. And the second people realize, they're like, what? No, I'm not letting that happen.
Yeah, like we saw with the WPATH files recently.
Yeah, which is nice that that's got some traction. Good to see, but again, the WPATH files, I believe that there's people who have done stuff on the Eunuch archives. Wasn't that a ReduXX article, actually?
That was me.
Yeah. That was you, yes. So, see, I was speaking to the source right here. And that was all based off the Standards of Care 8, which was released, was it last year or the year before? Can't quite remember.
Well, it was finalized in 2022, September, I think, but the initial draft document was December 2021.
For those who don't know,
And
it basically proposes that eunuch is a gender. And I was literally using that unironically, which isn't a real word, but fuck it. Like, unironically, I am a eunuch. I didn't plan to be one, I just am, because I've been castrated, right? Because that's what it is. And now they're turning around, and it's almost like a PR move to say, eunuch's a valid gender, but also, I didn't know this, but there is a huge community of men who are deeply into castration, not transition, just castration. And they will go get themselves castrated and then take pictures, and that really kind of confused me, because I'm like, surely if that's all sexually motivated and they castrate themselves, they're just going to not want to do anything anymore. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, there's a lot of conflicting research about that. Let's talk about like the Skopsi, for example. So the Skoptic cult in Russia was a castration cult that operated for, I think, around 200 years. And what they found with men who had been castrated, now, that could be either way. That could be removal of testicles and or removal of the penis, which is penectomy. So it's not just, there's a couple different varieties. But they found that, some of these men who underwent the procedure would actually become in more of a state of like a sexual frenzy, because they had sort of lacked like the ability to naturally orgasm, if that makes sense. So it was like a frustration kind of thing. But I do notice too that with some of the sissy stuff, there's this like, God, it's so gross. Sorry. There's a fascination with, the prostate orgasm as opposed to like ejaculation. So there's more than one way to get there, if you catch my drift.
God, I'm alarmed at how much I'm worried for you, Genevieve, like how much you know about this. Like, I didn't even know that one. And I'm like a recovering degenerate, right? But fucking hell. Like, my heart actually hurts. Listen.
Yeah, so people have this tendency to think that, well, if the surgery has happened, then it's safe, right? You know, like, sure, put them in women's prisons or let them in women's restrooms, etc. But I've written several case studies of men who became even more violent
Yeah,
and more
don't
sexually
like,
motivated.
if you castrate a child sex offender, don't they graduate on to like becoming a child murderer? Is that true?
I mean,
I've heard that.
I have seen like the sadomasochism increase, if that's what you mean. But in terms of, let me just say that with the chemical castration of child sex offenders, there's a big problem there, which is one, they have been using Lupron, which is the drug that's given to children as puberty blockers, and two, it doesn't, you can't take these drugs for a very long time. So it's not something that you're going to be able to give to, say, pedophiles indefinitely for the rest of their lives. Actually, they found that it causes or can cause extreme liver damage. And so it's not recommended to be taken for a very long time, right? So the story about how these drugs are reversible, I wonder if there's any basis in that in regards to the sex offender research, because they found that once they had just stopped taking Lupron or drugs like it, their desire for recidivism just returned pretty much immediately.
Because that's, yeah, you're not really addressing the core issue there, right, as well. And I don't think those people can change. I know it sounds harsh, but I don't think they can. It's like telling, not that it's part of the sexuality, I think it's part of their wiring, their makeup, whatever's being crossed, and I don't know if you can ever really come back from that. I would like to think no one's beyond redemption, but I really don't. I've got me doubts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I do think that we need to think in terms of
But what's wild? Sorry,
protection.
what's
Yeah.
wild about the hormone shit, right? Is they will be, because I've been looking at like healthcare research on men who have been gonicized from like prostate cancer and testicular cancer and anything that affects the genital area, because that's the only real stuff that we'll have. And anyone who has these issues, there's like a 2-year cap on the GnRH antagonist, which is Lupron. It's all the same. Lupron, goserelin, spironolactone. It's all the same GnRH antagonist, right? Which prevents more testosterone being produced. It doesn't block it. It just stops production. So it's not like it's being produced and it's being blocked. It's like saying to your body, don't make any more. That's all. That's all it's doing. And in these papers and research, there's like underlines and underscores on it being a very temporary measure. It should only be for like 2 years or in a 6-month period here or there. And it's like when it comes to the trans shit though, they're quite happy to have us on that non-stop for like 5-6 years or 10, 12, or 20 years,
Yeah.
right? And it's like,
Right.
and what, we're gonna walk into this with absolutely no issues? Are you fucking kidding me? It's like, yeah.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's shocking that the protocols for how to give certain drugs to sex offenders is somewhat more robust
Right.
and strict than it is for children, even.
Yeah, it's really fucking crazy and infuriating because everyone's pretending, oh, we don't know, there's no research. The research is there. The research just needs to be connected. Like, we know for a fact what it's, I'm going to rephrase that again. We know what happens to women who have low estrogen and higher testosterone. They're more likely to develop dementia. They're more likely to develop issues with reproductive organs and a whole host of other issues that women will face. With men, we know that low testosterone is linked to cognitive decline. We know that high levels of estrogens in men is linked to grey matter. I can't remember the exact term. It's like grey matter, begins with a D. It's like it's basically like creates holes in your brain.
Density.
Something like that.
Density?
Or disparatory or something. It basically, what it does is it it reduces the amount of proteins the cells in your brain get. And because of that, they can't refresh and renew like they normally would, so they kind of just die. And that, in my opinion, we are on the footsteps of a massive, massive, massive rise in Alzheimer's and dementia, and it's gonna hit the trans community like a horrible wave, and no one's gonna be able to advocate for themselves. My worst fear is waking up every day and forgetting what I've done. Like, I've heard how this goes down of patients waking up in absolute distress. They're confused why they're in women's clothes. They're confused why they don't have a dick, right? And they're absolutely insanely distressed. And I'm like, that's living hell. That's living torture. Just fucking throw me off a fucking building if that's happening. Like, I'll go off to Gaza right now and do that shit. Because that is next levels of horror.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that is a good segue into talking about the impact of puberty blockers, and what people need to understand about hormones. Whilst testosterone and estrogens have impacts on the body, it's the lack of that does the most damage. For instance, in males, the lack of testosterone is what causes a great deal of issues in the cognitive decline, which we're talking about just before there. And as I was mentioning, there have been studies that have showed that high estrogen in males and low testosterone can be linked to Alzheimer's. And as I was saying before, like waking up in the middle of the night or in the morning and forgetting everything would just, it's so cruel. Then you've got all the stroke risks and all that sort of thing. But a lot of these studies do struggle to differentiate, is this a subject of taking the hormones, or is this subject of a very reckless lifestyle? Because what also needs to be mentioned is when you are dissociating and injecting hormones into your body and getting your body all cut up, you will pretty much do anything to continue that dissociation. That can include a lot of substance misuse or alcoholism. And that to me seems to be like an overarching prevalent issue within the community, to the point where I can tell who's drinking and who's on methamphetamines, who's on weed all the time. And it's all these things that dissociate. So for instance, on the harms, let's just talk about puberty blockers. What was the most striking thing that you found in your research? Because you've been all over the place with this.
Well, for me, there was this repeated statement made that we just don't know what the impact of puberty blockers is. So there's a lot of misleading statements that are made surrounding puberty blockers, and that's one of them. So the impact of puberty blockers, it's said, isn't known, but then on the other hand, trans activists will say that it's not experimental and that it's life-saving, etc. And these two things don't square, obviously. But as well, I've looked at some research on the skeletal remains of castrati or eunuchs in both in Italy and in China, because it was castration's a very long like 4,000 years of history and took place in different parts of the world. So there's plenty of evidence of the impact of that on the body. Anyway, these were males that I'm speaking of, but just the deprivation of the hormone of testosterone, like you had mentioned, causes a severe state of osteoporosis that progresses with life. So it has obvious impacts on bone development from the skeletal remains that we have seen. So it's not as though we don't actually know what this does. There's plenty of evidence if anyone wanted to corroborate them and put them together, but I think that people say this because the drugs that are given as puberty blockers, because they weren't designed for that purpose.
It's remarketing, isn't it?
It is, yes. So because they had never they had never done it on children, right? So it's a new cohort. So they say, we don't know what the impact will be on children per se, which is also technically not true because prior to that, it was given to girls, especially for something called precocious puberty. And there's an irony here in this because precocious puberty, at least in the United States, is thought to be associated with excessive hormones in food that you're eating, like whether that's meat or dairy. So then you have this problem of girls starting their puberty too early. And it's not a neutral condition, it can cause problems. So there is a need for some kind of treatment with it. But I have read some stories of women who had undergone Lupron specifically as a treatment for precocious puberty and other various women's issues such as endometriosis and fibroids and etc. And their stories are just horrific. I mean, absolutely horrific, like developing osteoporosis or early menopause in your 20s or 30s. Some women talked about their teeth falling out of their mouth, their jaws disconnecting from.
That's a nightmare. What?
It is.
That I've had dreams about my teeth falling out. You know what I mean? That that's where that belongs, not in reality.
Yeah, yeah. And I had written about this how women were actually kind of the canary in the coal mine for this puberty blocker experiment because after it failed, and now I'm talking specifically about Lupron or Leuprolide, after it failed to treat prostate cancer, which is what it was designed to do. Well, it didn't fully treat prostate cancer, I should say. It's used in conjunction with other drugs now. But after it sort of failed in that regard, it was then pushed on to women, especially for a range of under-researched women's issues, like I mentioned, endometriosis being one of them. And so there has this maybe 20-year or more history of women being prescribed Lupron and having just awful, terrible side effects.
They weren't even on it that long, were they?
No. I've read stories from women who just had like one shot and had terrible effects. And they're not being listened to. I think that if perhaps more people had listened to these women when they were speaking out, because they really started speaking out in the 90s, late 90s. There was a lawsuit against Takeda Abbott Pharmaceuticals by a woman named Karen. Her last name just escapes me now, but she was in terrible pain, constant pain, bone and joint pain. And I just wonder if more had been made about this huge scandal that was being conducted on women through the use of these GnRH agonists, then perhaps we might have gotten ahead of this a little earlier. I think it's very frightening that a drug that was developed to treat men with terminal cancer that is then used to chemically castrate pedophiles, right? So it's only used for, or it was only used for men when they were dying or if it was a punishment, and then somehow got pushed onto women and children as a quote-unquote life-saving treatment.
But you're not even allowed to give prisoners medicines as a punishment. Do you know what I mean? That even the castration thing has to be done in agreement. That is not a mandate. And people don't understand that. There is no, prisoners are very well protected from being medically experimented on. But a lot of them will opt for that chemical castration. And it doesn't work, does it?
Well, it can work, but only for a limited period, because what happens is this is a very powerful drug, obviously, because it affects your endocrine system. And so what happens is then with continued use, it causes liver damage. So actually the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is one of the biggest organizations in the US pushing prison policies. So for example, transferring male rapists into women's prisons. They're one of the leading organizations behind that. They have argued against using chemical castration for sex offenders on the basis of human rights, while at the same time arguing that it should be freely available to children.
It's really fucked up when you think about it. Now, I wasn't a child when I took. It's called Goserelin. It's just a different brand of the same thing. It's all the same, like the GnRH drugs. They're all the same. Um, so I was on the implant, and I had that from like 20. I wasn't 20. Yeah, I was 26. And what happened was I had only that implant for, I don't know, maybe a year or two, because the estradiol that they gave us just didn't register in my body because it was pills. And the pills just are really bad on your liver. And my liver function was really bad after not so long. And then they had to switch. They blamed it on the pills, not the GnRH and anti-androgen thing. And I was on that for friggin' 4 years, right? Like non-stop. And I'm wondering, maybe I've got some protection, and the fact that I was a fully grown adult, that's hopefully helping us. But I wonder what even the studies say for the usage in men, like after a short time, like adult men going through prostate cancer and all that sort of thing. And just how blasé we are with like a young people's health, like just throwing it all away. And it's like, because when they tell you about the side effects, they only tell you the things that you'll benefit. So they'll say, oh, your skin will get softer. You'll, if you've got pattern baldness, you'll notice a reduction, but it won't completely stop it or cure it, right? Or if you've got like, your erections will fade. And it was all very like, oh, okay, so these are all the things that I kind of really want out of this drug, but they're not telling you, oh, your bones will also stop crumble because you're not actually, because you're lacking testosterone, you're not actually refreshing the outer layer of the bone, just the inner layer. So you're going to be having fractures within 5 to 10 years. I'm already at a state where, like, I'm covered in bruises constantly. Like, I'm very clumsy, like, extremely clumsy, holy shit. But I bruise like nothing. And my mum, osteoporosis runs in my family anyway. My mum had a fall the other week. The dog, she's got this great big golden retriever. He's lush, but he's stupid, and he kind of knocked her over, and she shattered her arm. And she's only like in her mid-60s, and I'm just thinking, my future. You know what I mean? It is very, very terrifying because I sit and talk to a lot of people who have been on these drugs from much, much earlier, and I really worry for us. It is genuinely scary to think about, and yeah, because we have been experiments, and it is an experiment. But more importantly, what people must understand is it is a rebrand, because these drugs, what it was is you had these pharmaceutical giants who made this drug. No one wanted it for its original purpose, so they then tried to move on to women. Oh no, wait, there's this market for the kids, so we'll do the kids. So to explain the children one, Ferrin Pharmaceuticals, who produce Lupron, I believe, funded the 2006 Dutch protocol study, financed it, and that was the one that said puberty blockers were fine for kids. So all routes lead back to people who are like, how can we rebrand this? How can we resell this? And then you look at everything else that happens socially with it as well, and it all just falls into place. It just seems to me, what the situation as a whole, like gender affirmation, reeks of social engineering. And I'm not sure if you agree with that or not. I don't think this is just the example of powerful lobbyists, because if that was the case, I feel like the likes of Scientology, which did get some fame in the 90s and the early 2000s, right, before it started to fall a bit in the early 2010s, I feel like something like that would have really, really, like, thrived, but it didn't, right? And what is it that makes this thrive? There is design here. There is intelligent design in multiple facets. What are your sort of general thoughts and conclusions on that?
Well, yeah, I agree with you. Although we might have a different take on it, but just to go back to the point about the pharmaceuticals for a moment, I think Farron Pharmaceuticals produced a different drug from Lupron because Lupron was made by Takeda Abbott, which has now rebranded to AbbVie. But
Yeah, I'm so glad you just mentioned Abfi. Sorry to segue, but there was this Irish politician who has stake in this company, and they're really desperately trying to push a bill through in Ireland. Because I'm always getting quoted in this tweet from the documentary I was in, because that triggered this thing with this person. I don't want to say her name, by the way. But you can easily find it in relation to AbbVie and the Irish. I can't remember what the exact bill was called. But sorry, I'm terrible for interrupting, Genevieve.
AbbVie. So previously they were known as Takeda Abbott Pharmaceuticals, or TAP, and in, I think it was the year 2000 or about that time, they were involved in one of the biggest US FDA lawsuits, a settlement payout of 800, not 100, $875 million.
It's nearly a billion.
In a loss, nearly $1 billion, and because they were found to have been engaging in fraud and corruption. Specifically, they were giving doctors payouts to find reasons to give Lupron.
Jesus.
To find reasons to give Lupron. So they had this problem where they were, okay, we're going to give this to women for certain reproductive issues. We're also going to give it to children, primarily girls, for quote-unquote precocious puberty. But precocious puberty is extremely rare. It's very, very rare. So you have a very small patient pool. But with gender identity, it's so subjective. You know, you can get kids on it, you know.
Yeah.
But they had also several other issues with that particular manufacturer. So other lawsuits that included knowing that one of their, I want to say, diabetes drugs caused cancer. And as well, there's an interesting thing I learned when I was looking into this and the connection to DES. Are you familiar with diethylstilbestrol?
I am not.
It's the drug that was given to Alan Turing to chemically castrate him as a punishment for homosexuality, right? So DES was actually made by, you guessed it, Abbott Pharmaceuticals. And it was given to women during the 70s, I believe, as a supposed prevention for miscarriage. What ended up happening is the daughters of those women who were given DES, they developed cancer. So especially the girls would develop reproductive cancer. They're called the DES daughters. And so DES was banned by the FDA, and just a few years after it was, then Abbott produced Lupron. And the uses are identical. So DES was given for, quote unquote, gender transitioning as a synthetic estrogen. It was given for, I want to say, prostate cancer. It was also given for what they called height dysphoria in girls. So if you have a growing daughter and you think, oh, she's too tall, you give her that drug at that time. So I just found it very fascinating but suspicious that it's from the same company that produced DES, and then just a few years after it was banned, they moved on to Lupron. And I know that they're not exactly the same drug, right? They're chemically different, but they are similar, and they're so similar, in fact, that research often has compared the two of them. So It's
Right.
just like we never learn. We never learn from
Oh,
history, right?
it's not
Which is
that
what I was
we're
saying
not.
to you earlier, right? Like,
I don't know if it's us not learning, Genevieve. I think it's people learning how to be opportunist and take advantage and
mm,
profit. And this is the type of thing that plagues society. These big conglomerates who think we need to make some money. What can we do to fuck up people? Okay, let's just put this in. Who cares? No one's gonna care. We'll just do it, and they will get away with it.
well,
Um,
it's that rebranding again, right?
yeah,
Because AbbVie changed their name. You know, we changed the name of the drugs. Also, then it was Lupron. Now the drugs are just simply put all together in a group called puberty blockers. I think that there's something to this whole rebranding and euphemistic language that is mirrored within the gender identity movement too. And sorry, but you had been mentioning like social engineering, and that for me is there's just so many avenues you can go with that. I would say that the rebranding is a part of it for sure. I question, you know, how much everyone who participates it has any idea of what they're participating in. But I do think that you know, people like Jennifer Bielek have talked about the Stryker Corporation and
Pfizer, isn't it?
the sorry.
No, sorry, you're right. Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't be correcting you of all people.
Stryker or an Arcus. So the very wealthy corporations behind the money of the pharmaceutical industry involved in this, right?
Mm.
So I'm less well versed in that, but I know it's got something to do with HIV research as well. So there keeps being this overlap within gender identity pharmaceuticals and HIV research because, you know, both of them, in both cases, you have a lifelong patient. So it's extremely profitable.
Damn. And HIV, sorry, not HIV, but AIDS, the virus, that was patented, right? And it didn't exist before the 70s. Isn't that correct?
You know, that's not really my wheelhouse. I don't,
But the reason I'm saying that is it just kind of, again, and this may seem like tinfoil hatly, it just feels like they create these things that impact certain specific groups and then they come in with the solution. And just to go back
mhm.
on the language, puberty blockers is a misnomer. You're not blocking anything. It's a what's the real term for that? It's more like a puberty disruptor or a derailer because that's what it does. It doesn't. You can't just pick it back up again. You can't just be like, the train is off the tracks. It's fine. We'll just put it on the tracks and start again. Nah. You're gonna have to do a lot more work to it. There'll be damage. You can't just take a dislodged train and put it back and expect it to work. And that's kind of what we do with puberty bloggers. The young lads especially, like they're all. I've talked to loads of 18 to 21-year-olds who were on bloggers from even 16, 15, 16 when they were in the later stages of Tanner. And even they have been getting bone scans, and we're looking at 80 to 90-year-old sort of like the results or the equivalent of an 80,
Jesus.
90-year-olds. And that was there was one guy who sent it off to the New York Times in 2022 because I had a New York Times journalist asking us about it. So I hooked them up with a few lads who had that, and this one guy did have his result and he did send it, but they just must have. I don't. I think there were some journalists there who really were trying, but I don't think they had any single chance of getting that story out. Um, but the impact is severe. But also, again, what we miss with the hormones is it's the lack of hormone that really does a lot of the damage. You know, like for women, you have a lot of atrophy, and that can create a lot of more problems in the reproductive organs, especially with atrophy and all the joint pains. I've talked to Sinead and Kira mentioning the joint pain. Luca, whose interview will also be out by now, she was experiencing really bad joint pain too. And this is like actually stopped Lugger from being able to do like speaking out, because it's just hurting all the time. And you know, these are people who started the course in their mid to late teens. But what we really, and that's tragic, right? But what really, really is fucked up are the ones who get it at like 8 or 9, which is way too early, like even before they've started any tenor stages. Did you see that video of those 3 young boys who were all puberty blocked, and they literally looked like kids, and it was like they were 15, 17, just Jennings.
On Jazz, yes. Oh my
Oh,
God.
yeah,
I
dude.
was gobsmacked because like one of them was like 17, but they all kind of looked like 13-year-old
They
girls.
looked younger than that. They looked like they did look like little girls, like not women, not little girls. They really did look like that.
Yeah.
And we are we're gonna have to change laws or something. And I'm sure the laws are actually quite robust for anything that depicts a child, but we are entering that nightmare territory where you're going to have people who have still got the bodies of children who are in adulthood. And it's like, we know fine well what the porn industry is going to do with this. But I don't know, it just
Yeah.
feels really, really fucking sinister. When I watched that video, I was so shocked and so aghast. Like like very little like really phases me these days. I've seen so much and done so much, right? But that was like, fuck, their lives are fucked. They've got no
Yeah.
chance. They've got no
Yeah.
chance. How are you meant to reintegrate? And I mean, talking on the topic of the whole Peter Pan syndrome that's with transition happens with men and women, by the way. Like the women want to be boys, the men want to be girls. It's not about I'm a woman, I want to be a man. I'm a man, I want to be a woman. It's all regression. It links into that age regression. But with those kids, they've they've got a munchy parent behind them, all of them, because to start that you need that on board, but also you need aggressive doctors telling the parents so. But it we are headed into nightmare levels of that. But to go on to the topic of Peter Pan syndrome, I do feel like the whole thing with transition is a huge bit of arrested development. It's all about delaying, like accepting yourself as an adult version of yourself. And you see a lot of the behavior is very regressive. It's all about you need to protect me, you need to nurture me, you need to accommodate me, you need to do everything for me. And if you don't, I'll scream and shout, and that will work. And it did work for a time, but now it doesn't, because people are kind of seeing past it, and most importantly, no one. I think a lot of the fear in speaking out is totally lifted. Like having any of these conversations 3 4 years ago on social media most certainly would have been impossible. It was still difficult in 2022. It's still difficult now, but not like what it used to be. Something definitely has changed. Have you
Hmm.
noticed in your work a change in the playing
Yeah.
field?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I am so busy that I've got the blinkers on, and but when I first started talking about this, the just sheer amount of hateful comments that I used to get on Twitter, or people sending me nasty photos to my DMs, because I usually keep my DMs open. Um, that's gone. Now, granted, I've blocked a shit ton of people, but
But you're not
but I
making
do
new
think that
accounts to do it, you know.
yeah,
A lot
yeah.
of the energy and fervor is gone. Like they're not as bold as they used to be. Some are getting way more desperate, don't get me wrong, but
Hmm.
I have also noticed it too. I still, like, very rarely do I get abuse now in a DM. When I first came on the scene, it was like, you did this to yourself. Stop trying to, like, fuck over trans rights just because you made a mistake.
Oh,
Blah, blah,
that's
blah.
disgusting.
All the normal party lines that I'm not sure if like they all sit and gather around and agree the lines to take, but it literally does feel like they've got like a rap sheet to follow or something, and they're just coming in and they're just telling me like all the lines, and I'm like, yeah, I've heard this one 100 times.
Well, I guess we can thank Andrea Chiu this week for piquing more people.
Can you talk about that?
Because, yeah. So in this week, we've seen so many things in the week that we're talking in, which is the beginning of March. But we just saw NHS England pull back on puberty blockers. I mean, it's not a full ban, but they've pulled back. And just a couple days prior to that, you had Andrea Chiu, this American academic who identifies as transgender. He's born Andrew Chiu.
Can I just
And
interrupt you and say, is this the guy who said little girls are kinky?
No, that's a Lulk Vyed Menon. Yeah, that's
okay.
another great representative of American trans activism.
Yeah.
But no, he's an academic who attended Duke University and NYU, New York University. He was appointed as a book critic by New York Magazine in 2021. And then last year he won a Pulitzer Prize for that.
Oh, yes. I remember. Sorry.
Yeah, so he's the one who got his career kicked off in about 2018 by writing a paper called Did Sissy Porn Make Me Trans? And then was invited to several top prestigious, expensive universities in the US to talk about this. One of them being a university where that Professor Grace Lavery teaches, so UC Berkeley. But yeah, so he's kind of well known in our circles anyway for saying that pornography inspired him to transition. One of his quotes is that pornography is what it feels like when you think you have an object, but really the object has you. It is therefore a quintessential expression of femaleness. Sissy porn did make me trans. At the center of sissy porn lies the asshole, a universal vagina through which femaleness can always be accessed. So he said some really disgusting stuff about women. But the reason we're bringing him up is because he recently published an article in New York Magazine calling for essentially soft advocating for an abolition to age restrictions on puberty blockers, surgeries, and hormones. Now, he didn't fully say remove all age restrictions. That would be too blunt, but he said transition at any age. And I think that a lot of people who saw this, were quite shocked and, what's going on? I think some people may have peaked because of it, or at least asked questions because of it. But why? Why? He did it he did it as a response to the kinds of things that we're talking about, as a response to what he calls anti-trans activism. So the reason he did this is because there are many laws in the US being considered right now that would restrict such medical interventions for minors, whether that be puberty blockers, hormones, surgeries, or all of them. And so his article, I guess you could call it, or an op-ed, was criticizing those laws and basically telling trans activists to push for total removal of any restrictions at all. That's my take on it.
And which publication did that land in again? Was it the
New York Magazine?
Fucking hell! How do they get? They're always like, one of the things that detransitioners get is like, oh, when a detransitioner speaks, the media all over you. I'm like, bull fucking shit. You get prime opportunities like that just thrown at you to say the most obscene, unhinged, untested, unscientific statements ever, where I can't even sit here and tell you that I regret having my dick thrown inside my body. I'm not allowed to say that for some reason, because that is too much. But if they want to advocate that anyone of any age can take that even like a 2 or 3 year old, that's insane. That is actual
Mm-hmm.
insanity. And they have the most crazy unfiltered access to the academic sphere, to the tech sphere, which needs to be mentioned. Like, trans and tech is a big part of the reason why we are in this mess. And the person who has been at the forefront of that battle would be Joshua Moon out of the Kiwi Farms, because his site has been rigorously attacked through lots of online campaigns and by these major trans activists who have got him kicked off Cloudflare, which is a DNS that basically stops you. I don't know if DNS basically stops you from getting DDoSed, right? So your site
Mm-hmm.
gets to stay up. And he's just been attacked in so many different facets. But my man, that guy has just fucking persevered, found solutions. He's now got this big ass legal fund to help to counter all this, and he's really rose from the ashes. But what I'm saying that for is because the tech aspect of this cannot be understated. The grooming that occurs on Reddit, it like in the trans circle, is all based on the internet. Like, it does span out into local groups and LGBT schools, but if you notice the likes of, say, mermaids, and Gender GP, they will all have Discord groups that are like semi away from the main thing, and that's where you get a lot of the like what I call actual grooming, where you've got adults interacting with children, talking about topics that they really have got they shouldn't really be talking about. And Discord
Yeah.
itself is worth warranting investigation, because in March, I think it was 22, possibly 23, I'm not sure which year, but it was last year or the year before, where Discord had to update their terms of service to specifically mention the grooming and the platform being used for grooming and child exploitation and sharing that material. And I think that's pretty fucking major. Like, that a tech thing, like, sorry, that like a platform like Discord would have to make such a statement. Have you ever looked into Discord? Has that ever came up?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it's funny. I was actually having a conversation like this years ago with someone saying like, "Oh, there's got to be all kinds of bullshit going on Discord because you can just private message someone. There's like no oversight, or there wasn't at the time I was saying this. There might have been some regulations put in recently that I'm unaware of, but you can just be completely anonymous. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know the age of the person you're talking to. They can say whatever they want." And then one of the things that trans activists like to do, or is to like check in with, update pictures. Oh, why don't you show me an update? How's your body? Like an update of your body. So imagine an adult
Yeah, I know
grooming
what
a
you mean.
kid into
Progress
this.
pics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me see your like. Ugh, I hate saying the words, but like your growth or whatever.
Yeah.
And then an interesting thing I saw when I was just looking at the what's it called? The directory. So there's a Discord directory of all the groups that are there. Is if you search certain keywords. So if you search trans in the directory, you're gonna get a whole bunch of kink groups that pop up too. So like
Yes.
furries and things like that. And some of them say that they do age restrictions, but like really,
Yeah.
I don't. I had briefly joined one of these a few years back out of curiosity, and it was specifically aimed at minors. So it was for quote unquote trans kids, and they had a not safe for work channel in there. And it's like, what's going on?
Why would you
What's
need
going on
a
with
not
that?
safe for work channel in a
Yeah.
in a child transition thing? Yeah,
Hmm.
or it all starts and ends in grooming platforms. Like Reddit is a big one, but more specifically, it's the taking them out of the control out of their community group, and it's getting them into a place where they can be contacted 24/7, like on Discord, and it's very private. You can delete, you can mask, um, And I had this experience when I was not with Discord, it was with MSN and ICQ, because I'm that old, right? So you're like 21 years old, so you probably can't remember. Um, but yes, in back then it was like the very early social medias. I don't know if you can ever recall MSN Messenger. That was like the first like commercialized messaging application that we had on the internet in the very early 2000s, late 90s. And there had been others around, but it got very popular around then. And then from there you had Skype, but we also had stuff like ICQ. And ICQ is the backbone of a lot of the like chat functions on the internet. It's what Discord was inspired from as well. Because I did have friends who were also in these groups, like my age, but there was also loads of adults. And then it's always like, talk to me on MSN, and then you start this conversation, and then all of a sudden you don't realize it's happening, and they're just there all the time. They're always checking in, but it's not like intrusive. And then before you know it, it kind of escalates. But they have your trust. They've got a common interest, and with this, it's just so direct. And rather than the trans thing, in my opinion, fast tracked the grooming process, right? It
Yeah.
drastically. So where what took somebody, say, months and months of trust building to have that one private conversation where I shared a snapshot photo of something, right, when I'm like 13, right? That took a long time to build that up. Whereas now you dive into a Discord that has already got channels set up for this. It's already got a predisposition to talk about this. Changing your body is
Hmm. Yep.
already embedded in the topic.
And you already have something in common because that's
Yeah.
what predators like to do is they need to find something that they know that the child is interested in to talk about. So you've already, bam, you've got that issue, and you can use it to separate the child from their parents emotionally or physically or both. And I really suspect this is also why there's such a huge overlap with anime as well, because
Yes.
children love cartoons, and anime, at least in Japan, it is still legal to create and produce animated child pornography, so
That's
they
really
can
fucked up.
get the kids into something innocuous like Sailor Moon first, and then start to show them pornography too.
I don't say this enough, but the anime itself is a little bit of a psyop, because what it does with these characters, you look at the age of the characters, and women especially, in this, they're always drawn to be much younger, they're always drawn to be much smaller, or the proportions are all out of whack, whatever. But it's all about like being infantilized and but sexualized at the same time. And it gets like the more you like look at it with that lens, the more you can't unsee it. Especially when they're like going,
Hmm.
ah, ah, and they're making all these fucking daft noises like that, right? And
Yeah.
but the character's meant to be an adult, or they'll cop out and say, "Oh, she's like a teenager. Don't worry about it." And it's like, well, why is she drawn like a kid? Why is she acting like a child, but also being sexual? It really is disjointing, and you don't need to go too far to go from anime to hentai, which is the pornography version of anime. And from
Hmm.
hentai, you open up to all the other categories. So, I was quite obsessed with yaoi, which is the male on male anime stuff. I know there are women who get drawn into the fan fiction stuff, and that's all part of it too. And for the guys, they get into all the fucked up shit. But it does feel like it is fucking people's brain up as well. And also
Totally.
the grooming memes, the egg IRL memes, the all the anime led memes.
Hmm. Yeah, and cartoons and anime really strongly appeal to, well, children, of course, but also those with autism, because
Yes.
there are very obvious social cues within cartoons, specifically, not just anime, that tell the viewer what's happening. So if it's difficult to read people in real life, it's easier to read the expressions of cartoon characters, for example.
Shit! I did not think of that once. Then that is so obvious when you point it out. Isn't it so annoying how, like, this shit is really obvious when somebody says it, but you're like, how did I not... You know what I mean? Like, I know exactly what you're saying. So when they're angry, like, the face literally changes and they'll have, like, red lines. Or if they're embarrassed, they'll have, like, a drop of water on the side of the head. And it's like,
Yep.
yeah, holy shit. That...
Yeah. And so I think there's a strong overlap there with, autistic children anime, and then possibly being groomed. Yeah, well, adults as well. And, it's like the Peter Pan thing again. Anime is so childish.
Yeah.
And it's very disconcerting when you see an adult acting like an anime character. It's disturbing even. But it happens all the time nowadays, right? Where you have, like we mentioned,
we're supposed to say that there's no sexual element of that, and that doesn't get overlapped or crossed somewhere down the line. We all know. Like, everyone's supposed to say, nah, it's not. That's just in your head. Bullshit. Prove it to us. Prove it. Then why do you need to dress like that? Right? Why do you need to do that? Why do you need to show everyone that? Because within this, there is an escalation too. Because that's what transition is, ultimately. Is an escalation.
right.
At this point, Genevieve, we're nearly up to 2 hours. So it has obviously been amazing. I would like to consider in the future if we may want to do a part 2, if this has landed well. I imagine it would land well. There are a lot of truth bombs that we do need to sort through. There's a lot that needs to be put to rest, but we are also in a very interesting territory. Like, I don't think the tide has turned. I think there's a tidal wave coming in, and the pushback is going to be so quick and so fucking hard. And I don't think activists especially really have any idea what's coming, because I've seen some delusional takes from people saying that, considering that they think they're winning. Like, literally, like, oh no, we're winning, the transphobes are going to lose. And I'm like, puberty blockers are getting blocked, half of the US states, because the likes of Chloe Cole, Prisha, Luger and all them have banned a lot of shit. You've got all these high court decisions. You've got all these gender critical court cases which are winning, and you're trying to tell me that you're winning? I'm sorry, that is a call. That they are... Do you know how, like... Did you ever see the movie Downfall? Great movie.
No, I haven't.
Great movie. It's the last moments of, like, the German army, the Third Reich, the Nazis at the very end. It's where that famous Hitler sketch comes out, where people, like, put the different subtitles over it. Like, go 999, you know, and all that sort of thing. Anyway. God, I need to get to the point quicker. That has a very specific scene where the German High Command are having a party, right? In this very because they were used to, the SS and high officers were in Germany during the war, and they were used to this extremely lavish lifestyle. They were away from the front lines most of the time, all of this high command. So there's this scene where they're trying to have a party, and they're all very, like, they're not accepting that Berlin is being bombed. There's literally dust coming from the ceiling, but they're trying to have a party. I feel like that's where we're at with Germany, where we are bombing Berlin right now. The line has long been held. We had a Stalingrad moment last year, I feel like, which was the turn. And now we are they're coming in from all sides, and there's just non-acceptance. But sorry, that was a big long ramble.
No, I think you're right, and I think that's why WPATH had, was it in September of 2022? Yes, I think that's why WPATH had removed all objective age restrictions from their standards of care at that time, because I think that they saw the writing on the wall. And I feel like the demands are getting more ridiculous because of this pushback that people like yourself, and thank you for mentioning Chloe Cole, are doing. So yeah, I think that there's going to be some desperation and some perhaps even more extreme demands and activism, but that always helps our side of things, actually, when we let them say the batshit things that they actually think.
Let people peak by letting them speak.
Exactly.
Why is it you think they dig the heels in even further when you would think that the response to they can see the writing on the wall is to roll back, not go holes in on fucking... And by the way, fuck WPATH, can't say it enough.
WPATH.
Yeah, fuck WPATH, motherfuckers. I feel like it's a Rage Against the Machine song. Anyway. But seriously, fuck WPATH. Why is it that people dig the heels in? Why don't they just try and meet halfway? If they thought the writing's on the wall, wouldn't they kind of roll back? Why would they dig in more?
I think there's probably a lot of reasons. Probably money, but also saving face. I mean, if your whole ideology depends on, well, you're depending on children to be your shield, right? Then if you say that a child can be born transgender, that it's innate, that it doesn't come from porn or any other outside force, it's inside of you, then eventually that logic lends itself to like, okay, well, transition a fucking 5-year-old or whatever, because that's their innate thing. Like, they're not a logically consistent group of people, generally speaking, but on this point, that follows a twisted logic, doesn't it? That this must be free and open for anyone, no restrictions, no gatekeeping, they call it. So
I would love some gatekeeping. Holy shit, that would have saved me so much in my life if I was gate kept, but I wasn't. Bring it back.
yeah.
Sorry, interrupted you again. I'm terrible. Typical man.
No, I don't know. It's hard to get into the minds of these people, but I suspect a lot of it's got to do with money for the more powerful people involved. So, yeah.
Genevieve, it has been an absolute honour and privilege and pleasure to speak with you, and may I just say before I do wrap up that thank you for what you said on GB News about the Eunuch archives. I think that entire segment was great. I did feel cringe after, like, I said the thing, but it just came out, like, do you know what I mean? It was very much like, the asked is what I think, and I'm like, well, fuck them. I'm going to say that. Fuck them, right?
No, you're right. No. They were doing a victim blaming sort of statement, weren't they?
Yeah, Darbo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, Genevieve.
Yeah.
I can't restate this more than enough, but thank you so much for all the work you've done, and your kindness, and all the knowledge that you bring into this. You were a trunologist, an honorary PhD in trunology from the University of Ritchie. Will be on its way.
Thank you.
But well done, Genevieve, and thank you so much.
And likewise, I think that what you're doing takes so much courage, and I think it's paying off, though. So.
Yeah, I think we are both seeing the fruits of our labour bear fruit. But once again, thank you and goodbye. See you soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye.